Hello, I'm Stowe Boyd, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak with you today. And I'm sorry that I can't be attending in person. We are living in a new economy, a new world, driven by exploding technological innovation, accelerating societal change, and a short list of potentially disastrous trends like climate change, economic inequality, and the decline of democracy. As a result, much of what we have come to know about the world is no longer valid. Today, I won't be trying to solve all the world's problems or answer every question about the future. I will be focusing on the goal of a sustainable, human-centered, but technology-channeled future, and the skills that we will have to learn, both as individuals and as organizations, to thrive in that emerging future. A year ago, a friend tweeted a chart from a report by the World Economic Forum, and he got me thinking. The table for 2020 and 2015 are the sort that CEOs and HR staff might have picked for new hires in 2010 or even back in 2005. A skill like complex problem solving is now a given, I thought, just table stakes. And note that complex problem solving was number one on their list in 2015 too. Things have been changing faster than that. And so I thought that the world had changed so much in the past decade that we need to consider the World Economic Forum's list as basic, like numeracy and literacy. I mean, yes, creativity. Yes, people management. I decided we need a better list of skills for a new world of work. So I pulled from my writing 10 skills that I had spent time thinking about in the past few years, all pointing towards a working future. Now, a working future I will return to later in the talk. Albert Einstein said, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." If only we could all could be so curious. But curiosity is a proxy for the desire to learn, to be open to the pursuit of digging into the unknown. In a world where the rate of change is accelerating, we need to accelerate our rate of learning, and so we need to become more curious all the time. Curiosity is in fact the number one thing that Google now searches for in job candidates. Laszlo Bock, Google's head of people operations, said, "For every job, though, the number one thing we look for is general cognitive ability, and it's not IQ. It's learning ability. It's the ability to process on the fly. It's the ability to pull together disparate bits of information." Now, curiosity varies across the population. But we can learn to be more curious, to adopt the patterns of the most curious amongst us, to learn to speak to strangers, for example, or to ask more questions, and to pursue ideas to find out what works and why. As just one sub-skill, curious people have a tendency to create anticipatory networks. That's connections to experts, oddballs, and people with diverse backgrounds, so that they can see the world through others' eyes and draw upon their insights and advice when needed. Research has shown that people are more curious when conditions are right, when they are given more autonomy, when they feel competent, and when they feel connected to others. Organizations should pay attention to those findings and work hard to create an environment where curiosity is more likely to flourish. Freestyling is a term taken from so-called freestyle chess, where people are allowed to use any resource, chess books, chess programs, calling people on the phone. They can use all of those in the course of play. And today, the most critical of these tools are AI-based chess programs. The perhaps surprising result of freestyle chess is that the winners are teams of people and chess programs, not people alone or chess programs alone. And the people in the teams are not the world's strongest players. They turn out to be the best at applying judgment when the chess programs disagree on what moves to make. The takeaway from that is that much of how we will operate in an AI-rich future will be a balance between AIs augmenting our work and us augmenting the work of AIs. As I say, we have to learn to dance with the robots, not to run away. But that means we have to make robots that are dance-withable, and we have to make robots that we don't want to run away from. Traditionally, leadership has generally been understood as a person assuming a role or position of authority that has a high degree of control over decision-making, and that decision-making impacts other people or the organization as a whole. Traditional leadership since the Bronze Age has been associated with charisma, the ability to attract, charm, and influence the people around you. Note that this has had mixed success, however, because charismatic sociopaths can cause a great deal of trouble. Traditional leadership has also been associated with bureaucracy, where hierarchical controls exist to define who has say over what, and to make organizations ultimately slow to change and tightly scripted. But in today's world of flattened organizations, we are operating more around networks and less on hierarchy as we seek to become more fast and loose in the name of agility. Hence, emergent leadership. The ability to steer things in the right direction without the authority to do so through social competence. This is another of the key skills Google looks for in new hires, because it found that emergent leadership correlates strongly with future success in Google's networked organization. And it probably will do so even more in the future. While we might want greater levels of certainty in the world, we are moving into an era of increased uncertainty. So we'd better learn how to live with it and to temper our natural desire for certainty, because we're now in a time of complex dilemmas and not simple answers. We've learned a great deal in recent years about human cognitive bias. The most important thing is to realize that we can't counter our biases simply by becoming aware of them, that they exist, or how they work. That's true. It's just like you can't correct your vision by understanding how the lenses in your nearsighted eyes are flawed. So we have to accept at a fundamental level that we are inherently wired to be biased, and therefore we need to systematically resist the peculiar gravity of bias. In effect, Ross is suggesting that we slow down so that our preference and social biases don't take over. Because we're deferring decision making, his technique is to defer decision making and instead view the activity that might be viewed in general as decision making. You cast it as information gathering, because you're intentionally slowing down. We may even go so far as to intentionally dissent with the perspectives and observations that we would normally make, that seem natural to us, and instead surface that dissent explicitly in our thinking and not just let them happen to us, not just let the biases take control as we follow our gut. The idea of constructive uncertainty is not predicated on eliminating our biases. As I say, they are built into our minds as deeply as language and lust. And on the contrary, constructive uncertainty is based on the notion that we are confronted with the need to make decisions based on incomplete information and with a biased mind. More than ever before, learning trumps knowing, since we are learning from the cognitive science that a lot of what we know isn't so. It's just biased decision-making acting like a short circuit and blocking real learning from taking place. We are too quick to relegate ethics to the philosophers, often ivory towers, and to leave ethics unexamined when discussing work skills. This actually means, I believe, that we're afraid to examine our ethics because they are deeply buried and strongly linked to our self of sense, identity, and belonging. And perhaps we don't want to look at the deep contradictions that we embody. The Me Too movement might be ushering in the need to re-examine our ethics, for instance. Complex ethics are needed to jumpstart ourselves and to consciously embrace pragmatic ethical tools. As just one example of a pragmatic ethical tool, von Foerster's empirical imperative states we should always, quote, act always to increase the number of choices, unquote. We are seeing a great number of political movements pushing simplistic ethical systems like everyone for themselves. Those and other ethical systems that ignore the complexities of the world, like those who deny climate change, will have to be rejected. And complex ethical systems grounded in science will have to displace them. This means that organizations will have to explicitly get in the business of thinking about the ethical systems that the organization is based on, and not just taking it for granted. We're living in a time of wild and violent volatility, where the normal ebb and flow, the historical normal ebb and flow of a period of stability followed by a period of instability followed by another period of stability, that cycle is no longer in force. We're in an extended period of unstable instability. That's a place where all bets are off. We're past the normal. The new normal is there is no normal. My friend Jaime Casio once wrote, "The species that adapt best to radically changing environments are the generalists. But most generalists are shallow, living on the peripheries of more specialized ecosystems." So our response to this, and taking advantage of the insight that Jaime offers us, we have to adopt the winning strategies of the two classes of living things. Those that are specialists, deeply connected to the context in which they live, and at the same time generalists, able to thrive in many contexts. We can't be defined just by what we know already, what we have already learned. We need a deep intellectual and emotional resilience if we're to survive in a time of unstable instability. And deep generalists can ferret out the connections that build complexity into complex systems and grasp the interplay of those connections. A great deal has been said about design thinking in business, taking the notions from the world of design and determining how to apply that into thinking about product, services, and the relationship between the company and its customers. But we need a larger shift. We need a shift in focus from the notion of designing of applications or objects or products or services. We need to think deeper into the design implications and those that create a need for new design roles, contexts, and methods. Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby said, "It's not only about imagining things we desire, but also undesirable things. Cautionary tales that highlight what might happen if we carelessly introduce new technologies into society." I think that's amazingly relevant given the problems we've encountered in recent years with the impact of Facebook and Google and YouTube on political dialogue, for example. So design thinking is not just about designing new products and services for commercial market-led contexts, but also considering broader societal issues. It's not only about designing products that can be consumed and used by customers, but we need also to think about imaginary products that might exist in years to come. And post-normal design logic jumps the curve from dreaming up things to build and sell to using the logic of user experience, technological affordance, and the diffusion of innovations in a more general sense, in the sense of envisioning futures based on our present, but with new tools, ideas, or cultural totems added, and to be able to explore their implications. I'm forced to use an inartful adjective, post-normal, to wrench the sense of creativity out of the context of its usage today. Alfonso Montuori sums this up by saying, "We should expect that in the post-normal times, the times we live in now, creativity will have a few surprises in store for us." So we can expect the notion of creativity to change in a large number of ways in the near future. For example, we live in a time where innovation is the foundation of business. We will need to educate ourselves in the pragmatics of how innovations move from a dream to a dent in the universe, from a light bulb in a thought balloon to a world-altering contraption or concept. And this is coming from the guy that coined the word hashtag, which was meant as sort of a joke response to a discussion, and now is a word that I hear 50 times a week. George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." However, while we need to learn from history, we must not be constrained by it, especially in a time where much of what is going on is unprecedented. Rather than learning history as lists of events or the sequence of kings, we should instead cultivate the skills that come from reflecting on posterity, the future generations, and the world we will leave to them. Posterity, rather than the future, implies continuity of society and the obligations of those living now to future inheritors, a living commitment, while the future seems more like a distant land peopled by strangers to whom we have no ties. This is part of the new ethics we need, but also the skills of futures work, to actively imagine and design futures, and to consider them in the light of the people who will inhabit those futures. We'll need to think of ourselves migrating into a future that makes new demands on us in order for us to survive there, which along with these skills will require new ways of working to apply them. As I once wrote, we will need to colonize the future ourselves. We must make our own maps of that territory, maps that show us as inhabitants and inheritors, making new economics, and breaking with the deals and disasters of the past, committing again to each other, to be a community and not consumers, to be partners and not competitors, to be from the future and beyond the past. As Boulding says, if we do that, then the future posterity has a voice in our society today. As the world spins ever faster, it has become more difficult to make decisions at all, and especially good ones. Sense-making is a social activity where plausible stories are created, retained, shared, and preserved. It is an ongoing, context-centric activity, a feedback loop. As people project themselves in their circumstance in the environment and observe the consequences of action over time and responding to those consequences. These narrative-based skills are critical in times of crisis, disruption, and change, which is the permanent situation now. So sense-making perhaps is the most critical of all the skills that we're talking about today. We need to nurture the capacity to create and share flexible models through narrative to derive meaning from a constantly changing set of information, events, others' thoughts, and to continuously reconsider the best course of action based on assimilating all that information. I've put sense-making at number 10 because it draws on all the preceding skills, and not just because it was the last I could come up with. All of these skills can be learned, even those like curiosity and creativity that seem to be personality characteristics. We don't have to become mutants to thrive in the future, but we do need new skills. Without them, we may fail to find a workable future. These 10 and other skills form a necessary foundation for that future, but not a sufficient one. We will need more to happen just than adopting these skills. Particularly, we need a broad education, policy, and regulatory shift to ensure that this working future, or some working future, comes to pass. And perhaps one of the biggest takeaways, I don't think these skills are being taught generally, or at least not in any systematic way. At some point, the inevitability of these skills could change that. There's a small group, maybe growing group, of agitators, I include myself in that group, who are shouting out that the times are a-changing. But I don't know how far our voices carry, or if others can actually understand our words. Always smart to leave with a piece of poetry. T.S. Eliot's Little Gidding. For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice. So perhaps this need, the need for a working future, and the skills that we're seeing are critical to that future coming into being. Perhaps this is proof once again that we need new ways to think about and talk about this rapidly changing world. We will have to find another voice. Maybe that's the 11th skill. Thank you very much. You can reach me if you'd like at workfutures.org or stowboy.com. And thank you for your attention.